This is the LiPetri Show.
Enjoy the sound of your own voice.
First off, I don't enjoy the sound of my own voice. It's just a pleasant voice to listen to.
It is, in fact.
That's all.
Yes, it's very soothing.
It's soothing.
Soothing.
Sometimes I've been told I think it's a little bit too monotone, so I have to add some inflection to my voice just so people...
You do. And you're also doing the thing of your age group right now. You're ending every sentence in a question mark instead of a declarative.
That's not true.
You totally do that.
I just said a declarative.
In your heart, you're a Valley girl from San Fernando Valley, you know?
I don't know if I should be offended from that or...
Not a bad thing.
It just is what it is. You got so the sound works good. You got the listening test. This is something that you're used to, right? The ear test.
I can handle this. Yeah. I have a little pods where we do it. This is kind of a cool look. Yeah,
they're cool. What can I say? I'm trying to make you.
And cool. Are we looking at each other the whole time? We're looking at the camera. What are we doing?
No, you just regular, just acting casual. That's all. It's just normal. I mean, if you want to stand and stare at the camera, that's awkward for the viewers.
My name is George Santos. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, that's it. Well, that's a whole separate animal. We could talk about that later too. Love to hear your thoughts, specifically in Massapequa Park.
I'll share all the texts from George.
Oh gosh, I know, but it's it's a real pleasure. You're a true friend. How's Mom, by the way?
Mom is good, 102, and probably in better shape than you and me. You know,
that's incredible.
Great appetite, sleeps well, prays, wonderful lady.
Did I ever tell you, by the way, that my great grandfather he's died at 101 years old, but he lived through 3 centuries. How cool is that? He was born in 1899, the 19th century.
Okay.
Lived through the entire 20th century.
Everything, yeah.
And then died in 2001, the 21st century.
Wow.
Isn't that the coolest thing?
Yes, yeah. Just in time for 9/11.
I know. But imagine that. I mean, being born 1899.
Think of what he saw.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Multiple. I mean,
where did he live?
Born and raised in Sicily.
Okay.
And then came over, immigrated, and then lived in the city first, and then Long Island.
Wow.
Worked for Con Ed. It was incredible. What a lifetime.
Did you go back to Sicily at all?
I mean, later on.
Yeah.
But it was not for a period of time. He was one of 9. It was it was insane. Like his oldest sibling was like 18 when he was born.
You have any real Italian, or are you all Sicilian?
No, I'm. First off, don't be insulting my other half. Don't be insulting. I'm Roman and Florence. The other half. That's these features. See these features? That's all Roman and Florence side, and the other half is Sicilian.
Okay,
that's my father's side.
It's a good blend.
He's got that. It's a perfect blend. Come on, we got some fiery and passion. We're passionately. What can we say with that? But Monsignor Jim Lisante, it is a pleasure to have you on. I was so excited. Gearing up and starting this podcast, I wanted you on because I know you're somebody that I can truly speak to candidly, as you know, always candidly, but also honestly valuing your thoughts, opinions, your advice.
Sure, Mike, I'm honored to be here.
You know, and I wanted to talk to you specifically about religion, where the younger generations are going with religion. What does it mean anymore? How did the past affect the present, today, and the future? And I think I want to start off with this article. It really stuck with me. Was this American church, according to Gallup survey, American church attendance hits historic low. And it says, for the first time in 80 years, Gallup has found that less than half of U.S. adults belong to a church, synagogue, or mosque, according to Gallup. They reported that church membership was 73% when it was first measured in 1937. It remained near 70% for the next 6 decades. And then around the 21st century started to decline. 2018, numbers dropped to 50%. And then this past year, or around 2021, it slipped to less than 50%. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Like, why is that?
Well, Mike, first of all, I'm not bothered by it at all. I'll tell you why.
Yes.
One of the more recent surveys indicated that still 90% of the people in America believe in God. They admit to a belief in God. And a majority of people who are not going to religious institutions admit that they are nonetheless religious or spiritual people. A lot of people now conflate those things. You know, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. But I don't know what a church or mosque or synagogue is if not a place to develop the spiritual life. So I think we just have to help people to understand that churches, mosques, synagogues are the places to go to develop a relationship with their higher power, with their God. But what I'm getting at is what you're talking about, not an absence of people's belief or faith. Faith is still strong. A sense of God is still strong. Suspicion of institutional religion is also strong. And that's the problem. So if you can correct people's perception of what's wrong with church, mosque, synagogue, you can probably redirect them to religion. But people are still believers in America. We are, in the whole world, the place where people practice faith more than any other place in the world. Even places like Ireland that used to be way above us have fallen to historic lows of empty churches. But in America, people still are searching for God. They still believe, but they are very, very wary about institutional religion. And to be honest with you, some of that is deserved. We have failed in many ways. Sometimes whether it's Catholic Church, mosque, synagogue, Hindu temple, when it becomes a business and not about connection with the higher power, you're missing the boat. And that's what's happened in a lot of religion. You know, my friends who go, for instance, to synagogues are stunned when they find out that people have to buy their seat for major services. What do you mean I have to pay for going to worship? And in the Catholic Church, what are we talking about all the time? We're asking for help, financial support, money, buildings, institutions. People want to go to church or synagogue or mosque for the same reason they go to AA meetings, to be in touch with their higher power. And when you stop being about that, you can tend to lose people. We have the largest, in Our Lady of Lourdes, Massapequa Park, one of the pastors, we have the largest pre-Cana in the diocese, young engaged couples coming to plan their wedding. And I say to them, I know the majority of you people sitting here are getting married in church, but I also know you're not going to church. So let's talk about that. And it comes down to three things they say. One is, if I go to church, half of your priests right now are from other countries. They have accents. I don't understand them. I'm not getting anything out of it. The other thing they do talk about is the importance of the scandal that you talked about, you know, that I'm very upset by the scandal. And unfortunately, a lot of people too feel that they are limited in their choices of where you can go to worship. In Nassau and Suffolk County alone, we have 134 parishes. And if something really matters to you, you want to go to a doctor, a lawyer, you want to go to a good plumber, a good electrician, you find out where is there a good one, and you search it out and you go there. But religion is different. Yeah, you know, if you live in Manhasset, you go to Temple Judea. If you live in Rockville Center, you go to St. Agnes Cathedral. How about you go where you can be spiritually fed, wherever that is? So I'm all for letting people know that they have a wider berth in terms of finding a place that feeds their particular need. But the important point I'm trying to make is I'm not worried because spirituality is not dead. People's sense of God is not dead. They're just wary and angry about the reality that their institutional religion has disappointed them.
I think that's fascinating because what you just said personally applies to me, is that institutional, and specifically for listeners and viewers, the scandal that we were talking about before we went on air was about early 2000s, was the cover-up. There's the church scandal cover-up of pedophilia and whatnot. Remember, I was 12, 13 years old around that time, so that was like right at the advent where now I'm going to catechism, I'm learning, you're seeing this firsthand about how important it is to have faith. And then meanwhile in the news, across the New York Times, is that headline, right? That cover-up headline, that scandal. I mean, that's something that hit home where it's like you look at it and everyone, I'm telling you, my generation, that really stuck with us. And I think as a whole, it really affected our viewpoints as the institution, because spirituality is, you always had the chicken and the egg theory, right? The fact that you have the Big Bang theory for how the galaxy was formed, the universe, but who created the universe, right? It leaves you with that the mystery. It's so mysterious that you just have to say there is some spiritual being there that truly has created each and every one of us, has forged a destiny, a pathway that allows us to foster those connected, that harmony among others, that love, that passion, the care. But the institution, those are two mutually exclusive points.
You know, Mike, first of all, you better hope that higher power is not a Democrat or you're in big trouble, okay? Now, a couple of things. You know, the scandal is terrible. The idea that any guy entrusted with spiritual authority, religious authority, could take advantage of his position by, pardon me, that's probably my 102-year-old mother. Off, Mom, later on.
Tell Mom hi.
For our listeners, that's my mom, 102 years old. I should never have taught her how to handle a cell phone. But For the information about the scandal, I think a couple of things need to be said. First of all the priests that have ever existed, we're talking about 4% did bad things. Now, that's 4% more than we want, to be sure. There shouldn't be one scandal where you take advantage of a child. Having said that, 96% of us are good guys who would never hurt a kid. But I think people, whether it's in the Boy Scouts or coaches in a softball team, I think people never like abuse, obviously, but they say, well, there's some people that just have illness, and that's an illness. The bigger problem, and I think you touched on it, Mike, was what about the cover-up? The guys in charge of the institution saw these things happening, and in too many cases in the past, decided, well, if nobody knows about it, or we move this guy, then we can take care of the problem. When the right thing to do would be to say, this isn't a curable thing, interest in children. He doesn't belong in ministry. Let's get him out. And if he's done crime, turn him over to the proper authorities. That's happening now. It wasn't happening then. By the way, important to point out, of all those crimes that have been committed against kids, the majority, in our church anyway, happened in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, not in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even though that became when the story was known, as you say, front page of the New York Times. But the vast majority of abuse that took place decades ago, and we're just now coming to terms with that. We have people right now suing the church who were kids when they were in the 1950s who were abused, right. And they're now stepping forward to say I was abused. They're full adults. They're older adults now. They're baby boomers, but they're coming forward now, and that's why the story seems to be very current. But there are so many checks. Right now, if you're accused once of any kind of abuse of children, you're out. You're gone. That wouldn't have happened in the 40s and 50s. It would be move the guy around, change his assignment.
Protect him.
And also back then what they would do too, which is important to mention too for your listeners and watchers, back then, like Bishop McGann, a wonderful bishop, he was advised by psychiatrists, psychologists at the time, you can send them away for therapy, 6 months, a year, and they can come back better, and they can again be in parish life. We now know that you can't get better, and you don't go back into ministry. But he was advised, as other bishops were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s, this is a manageable problem with therapy. It's not manageable. It's an illness, and it needs to be dealt with as an illness, and you don't put someone with an illness back in the community. You make sure they're out. So what I'm saying is, I think we're handling it better now, but there's a lot of sin to pay for.
Yeah, well, and I think it's more about that image where now going forward, because one of the things I love about you, and I think if the listeners that can't even see, don't know it yet or can't see it, but like you're somebody that I find so real and authentic, where I can just talk to you and it's as if it's anybody else, but you provide that spiritual guidance that others in the community necessarily wouldn't have, plus that knowledge of religion, right? That is unavailable with others. But more importantly, what I love is that it's not, I don't feel like I'm being fed when talking to you. Like it's never just something that's robotic or manufactured. And I think that's something that's missing in a lot of the religion as a whole today, is where it's coming off, where it's the impression is that it's just something that is rehearsed. Like you have to follow steps. You have to, when you go in here, you stand up, you sit down, you do that. And a lot of my generation is wants to have it where we come, we enjoy, and we learn in a way of anecdotes and history, but not where it's a mandatory instruction where what you must do and what you must say and must be. I mean, there have been numerous people throughout my life where those who have constantly done bad things, but then they use the justification of going to church. Right? I go to church every Sunday. Well, that doesn't make you a good person, right? Being a good person is your internal values, of which church, the purpose is to promote, right? And foster. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it. That's
totally true, Mike, but I want to say to you, not going to church doesn't make you a good person either.
Not going to church does not make you a good person.
Right. In other words, I hear a lot of people sitting where you're sitting saying, well, you know, these people go to church are hypocrites and phonies, and I would say some may be. Right. But the fact is, I'm going to church because I'm aware of my own sinfulness and I want to be a better person. As opposed to a person that says, because there are phonies and hypocrites in church, I'm not going to go to church at all.
Well, of course, but that's the two extremes, isn't it?
So I want to see you back there, Mike.
Yeah. Listen, it's something that I'm working on.
That's a good thing. I want to go back to something else. I think what you just said a moment ago in terms of what we need to do is you can't give formula, and you can't just say these are the rules, you have to follow them. You must convince people of the rightness. An example, I say in pre-Cana, 95% of you guys sitting here are about to get married, and I know you're sexually active. And 5% of you need to go to confession because you're lying to me. The bottom line is I know how active you guys are. So what's the problem with sex? Nothing. Sex is a beautiful gift from God, meant to be shared with the right time, right place, right person. Here's the problem. There's no such thing as sex without consequence. In other words, that if you say, I love this person, I share my body with them, my sex with them, and then you find out after you've married this person that she or he is sleeping with someone else, why is it that we are always heartbroken, that the sense of betrayal is so strong, that we are devastated by this? If sex isn't all that important, why do we get upset when someone we love cheats on us? Because sex is very important. That's the teaching of the church. Now, it's a lot better to approach it that way and say, look, do you like sex? Do you think it means something? Is it a sign of love between you and your significant other? Yeah. Do you want to see her or him share it with someone who's not you? No. Why? Well, because it's important. It is. And the church has always said it's important. But what I just said is a lot different from saying, you may not have sex outside of marriage. You may not practice birth control. You may not be homosexual. You may not masturbate. These are things that, the church has regularly done. Don't.
Right.
I think the approach has to be, let me explain to you why there's a better way. I'll give you another example if I can. I don't want to delay this thing on sex because I don't want to boost the ratings too high. But, like there's a great addiction out there right now to online pornography all over the place. And people say, well, what's the problem? It's a harmless sin if it's a sin. And here's what I say to them. I say, look, if you're watching that screen and instead of seeing some naked stranger, you saw your sister, your brother, your mother, your father, what would be your reaction?
That's really weird.
Oh my God, it would be sickening. No, I don't want to see somebody I love exploited, right? But that is somebody's son or daughter, and that is somebody's brother or sister on that screen. So every time you and I choose to go the pornographic route, we're in some ways supporting an institution that exploits people who are from families just like yours and mine. And that makes much more sense than saying, don't see porn. Explain why. Because other people are being denigrated unnecessarily for your pleasure.
Now, it's so interesting how you look at it through that perspective, because then the argument obviously is always, well, that's their choice. They can do whatever they want to do. If they choose to engage in sexual acts on camera for money, then it is what it is. But the same token, see, I'm looking at it from more of the dopamine effect and the mental side of it in terms of the chemical composition, where what you're doing is you're enabling this behavior that allows people to frequently get that hit of dopamine and then move forward, as opposed to developing discipline. And also, it actually dilutes the effects of sex and chemistry with your significant other. Right. So it's actually damaging to relationships as a whole.
We're both coming at it in terms of sex as something special and should be treated that way.
100%.
And that people should be treated with more. And you probably know as well as I, there's so much of pornography is backed by and the profit is exploited by organized crime. So it's not just an innocent thing where some actor says, I think I'll do porn because I really like to do porn. First of all, financially, they exploit them. And then on top of that, they make a bundle and pay these people for the day for their activity. So even economically, people are being exploited.
I did not know about that with organized crime.
Oh,
Can you elaborate on that?
No,
that is incredible.
Check it out. Come on, Mr. Lawyer. You should know these sort of things.
Organized crime. That's
Why wouldn't they? Easy money.
Wow. I got to see this.
Organized crime and pornography. Look it up.
I will look that up because this is, to me,
a whole lot better and easier than selling drugs on the street and being picked up for that and going to prison.
Wow. AP News. Oh, wow. I'm like looking at all these. This is crazy how that. I mean, but see, I'm looking at articles from like the 80s and stuff. This is new too?
Oh, yeah. It's even easier now. There's more pornography out there than ever before because of the internet. Who makes the films? Who sells the films? Services to the mafia.
Yeah, and I'm getting everything on Andrew Tate right now. That's
okay.
That whole incident. But I find that that was something so interesting is what you were talking about with the pre-can, specifically with couples. How, and I was saying this before, before you came on to a friend of mine, specifically how my generation, we still have that spirituality, those values, in the sense of, if you're going to have a child, you want them baptized. Mm-hmm. If you still want to have communion and confirmation, you get married in a church, right? Still have a priest preside over your marriage, right? It's so interesting how they want that. They're going to speak with you before getting married, but yet they're not going to church. And mind you, as the viewers have gauged, I get yelled at from you all the time because I'm also enabling that where I'm not going every week at all. So that's a problem that I'm working on as well. But this is something. But why is that? Why is that where like?
It's the difference, Mike, if I can, between I'm just using the Catholic Church as an example, but it's true among Jews and I guess to some extent Muslims. But if I say to most Catholics, are you religiously Jewish or are you culturally Jewish? Most people are culturally Jewish. If I say to most Catholics, are you nominally Catholic? Are you culturally Catholic?
Oh, you meant to Jews you would say that, and then to Catholics you
No, they're both in the same boat because most Catholics are not practicing Catholics. Most Jews are not practicing Jews in terms of going to temple, going to synagogue, practicing their religion regularly. But they want to be married by a rabbi. They want to be married in a synagogue in the same way Catholics want to be married in their church, have their sacraments. But that's cultural Catholicism. You know, I'm Italian, so I want to always keep the Italian thing going in my life. It's the same way with religion. We've always been Catholic. Well, what does it mean? Like if you don't go to church or practice your faith or study your religion, then it's just going through the motions. I'm a Catholic. Is this the same as being Italian or being Irish? No. It's about belief in God and working on that relationship with God. So I think a lot of people you're talking about want those sacraments, want to go to get married in church because they are culturally Catholic, not religiously Catholic. For me, from my perspective, obviously, in the best of all worlds, be culturally Catholic, but also be religiously Catholic.
I mean, I'm guilty as charged. That's what I have to work on with that. I mean, in that, I use myself as the example just for purposes of listeners and viewers, because this is why I wanted to have you on, where we're basically having this conversation in the public eye, because I think that so many people out there feel the very same as me, and these are some of the questions that they have and the thoughts, and then also the values of the Catholic Church's institution in terms of many of what you just said, in terms of no premarital sex, masturbation, homosexuality. I mean, that's been a big thing nowadays. I mean, our generation is looking at it like, why is that? If someone loves who they love, why is that against religion?
67 countries in the world still consider homosexual behavior to be criminal and will put you in jail, or frankly, in some Islamic countries, you can die for it.
Right.
So I'm happy with the fact that in America and Western Europe, we have a more open mind about this. It's wonderful. And Pope Francis said, a homosexual person must be treated with the same love and respect as a heterosexual person. The only place he probably disappointed some people in the gay community was he said, we still believe homosexual activity is wrong, but the homosexual person is a child of God equal to the child who is heterosexual. But I know certainly friends of mine who would be in the homosexual community would say, well, you know, this is who I am and I should be able to practice, you know, the way in which I want to in terms of my sexual practice. But the church still believes, rightly or wrongly in your mind, I'd be interested in your point of view, because you say you are part of that generation, that that sex is meant to be shared by men and women in a heterosexual marriage, which is why the church will never endorse homosexual marriage.
The problem is, doesn't this date back to the time of the Romans and the Greeks and beyond, where they were having homosexuals sex as well as heterosexual sex? Like, that's why for me, I'm looking at it as history has shown that men and women have been engaging in these acts for centuries.
But if you're a biblical person, Jewish or Catholic or Christian of any kind, the Bible is so clear about this, Mike. It never endorses homosexual activity.
Agreed, but that's the problem, is that the Bible isn't that representative?
Be careful, Mike. You may be a candidate someday, and going after the Bible is not a good thing to do.
I'm not going after the Bible. I'm going after. I'm thinking about how, in terms of people in our generation, view where it's a matter of how do I reconcile with who I am, what I like, and what I do versus the scripture, right?
Well, be careful. Even the use of the words there, what I like, doesn't necessarily justify or make it good. So a husband may say, I like to experiment with other women who are not my wife, but that doesn't make it right.
Oh, touche.
You know, so I'm sorry, go
ahead. No, that's it's just interesting in the sense of, I know many of myself and generations that I'm with, specifically on Long Island and New York, that's how it's viewed on, in the sense of who they are as a person. And that, in which case, if they wish to engage in that love and that passion with the person they love, that's their method of means.
Catholic homosexuals who come to me that would kind of agree with you, they would say, why would God give a person that particular orientation and not allow them to use it? The church would call them to live a life of chastity, which is very, very hard to ask people to do. It's not even practiced well all the time by heterosexual couples, right? And then going back to that, because I make the comparison there all the time, is when I have the pre-Cana couples in front of me, they say, well, look, we have sex because we love each other. So I say, so love justifies sexual intimacy. Yeah, I love her, therefore I have the right. But love without commitment is a wide open door that can get you in trouble, because I'm married now 10 years. I have kids, a mortgage. My wife doesn't look like she did on our wedding day. And there's someone at my office who's looking really good and she wants me. Well, I think I love her too. Why can't I love multiple people, Mike?
Well, because that's where I personally look at it as the commitment, where it's in the values and that connection you have with that significant other.
When you make that promise.
When you make that vow, like to me, the vow is so important, because you making that vow that I'm with you for the lifetime. I'm with you through sick, poor. It's you and me, baby. Like we're going the distance. We're evolving together. And if something happens to you, I'm there. If something happens to me, you're there. We have the children. We're raising them. We're going to care for them. We have the similar values of how we're going to raise them. And it's important in the sense of where we envision our future together. I think I look at it as, that's the union, right? It's a union between two. And for me, that union it's no more you versus me, but it's rather us together in one life moving forward. Now, maybe that's something I put a lot of responsibility on, but that's how I look at it. I think that's something that's what's so beautiful, is that you're now so ingrained in one pathway. You don't live that separate life. So if you have those temptations that come forward, that's something that it's frankly not even, it's so small compared to what you have in fulfillment, right? Because what you're going towards is more the superficial, right? How she looks and the features have decayed among both men and women as they age, right? Versus when they were younger. But our connection hasn't. Our intellectual conversations have it. Emotionally,
the family you made together.
We've made and cultivated. You are now no longer just my love, my wife, but you are the mother of my child. Yeah. And it's like we've created him or her. That to me is so awesome in the sense of what you've been granted by God, right? That gift to create and cultivate a family that you can then raise and perpetuate a legacy of values.
So you're saying Mike LiPetri is not going to walk up that aisle and get married until he knows I can live faithfully with this one woman
forever, and who I want to be with forever, and commit to her forever, and know that the two of us, that she feels the same, right? It is that, and that's where it has that symbiosis, where it's you and me on the same mentality, where we're together in this, and we have that partnership we've grown.
Have you found that yet?
So I'm working on it.
Okay. We got religion to work on and the wife to work on. Good, keep it up.
For me, it's something that is a organic process. I think that's something that I've tried to remove, is so much of thought in terms of pressure. And I think that's something that same thing with in terms of the religious side, where you're not feeling that pressure. You just allow it to organically flow in spirituality, right? You want to.
Well, what do you do, Mike, when it comes to the fact that people your age, because I have lots of friends in that age group, all their friends around them are getting married. The pressure to fall off the fence and find someone to marry. I have a friend, he's 42. I love the guy, but he's going to marry soon. And I said, why? Well, I'm not getting any younger.
Right.
Which I think is probably
That's
worst
the worst
reason.
answer. I absolutely hate that answer. Just because. It's not about that. I mean, that's what I think is false there. I mean, that was something that, I had the pleasure of seeing my parents married 38 years, who are just like, to me, just my two angels, and they're in love with each other, and they married out of love, and they created my sister and I out of love. And that's what I've always said, is that I'm fortunate because I've been created out of love. So for me, before I get married, it would be that same mentality of loving another and then creating children out of that love together, so that you foster.
So you believe faithfulness is possible?
I absolutely. I think faithfulness is a necessity in life in terms of true growth. And for me as a man and as a woman, I think that allows it in the sense of development of your mindset, of growth in terms of careers, even happiness, overall happiness. I mean, it reminds me of that fulfillment, that what was it? Freud, I think, had id, ego, super ego. That super ego is that fulfillment, that total fulfillment that's beyond just your simple skills, beyond just career, beyond, and even just in the sense of the inverse of where it's not just a marriage. It's more than that. It's where you're creating. It's almost like you're creating that
something holy, a whole new life, a whole family.
Right.
I worked for years on a program called Retrouvailles, which means rediscovery in French. It's a weekend for marriages in trouble. And at least half the people on that weekend have problems with infidelity. And then if you look at the facts, some studies say as much as 40% of marriages, someone is being unfaithful. In light of what you're saying about what's necessary, does that mean that 40% probably should not have married?
Well, we don't know what the origins were of the marriage in the first place. You'd have to first dive deep into that, right? Why did they get married? Was it as simple as just I'm not getting any older, or was it because I was told to? Right? Who knows about that? Was it because so and so had money? Was it because she knows or he knows my friends? I don't know what the reasons were. He was in my social group and we married and now we're here. Was it just because? Was it because? Is it a biological clock situation where then we don't know that. So I think that's relevant first before going even deeper into the second fold is why.
Well, let me ask you this related to that, Mike. So if you, God forbid, found a woman, you entered into it with good faith and the idea to be faithful, but she was not faithful, could you, in your own mind's eye, work it out once you discovered there was unfaithfulness, she was sorry it happened, and wanted to work on the marriage? Can you deal with that?
I don't know. I really don't know because my first thought was I failed as a man if my wife went and found somebody else. That means I failed as a man to provide her the love, affection, and passion that is I feel required among couples.
So you would own it yourself.
So I think you have to, as a man, because a woman that is fulfilled in all those respects, I don't think seeks others.
Okay. I
think so, and I think I wonder, is there anything through your history, through conversations with others that have indicated something like that, or is this like a first answer you've heard that has given that? It can't be.
Unfortunately, I wish it was as deep as that, Mike. After 42 years of counseling people, I have found sometimes some of the most ridiculous things. She was thin when I married her, but she put on pounds after the kids and never lost it. So you only stay faithful depending on the poundage. Yeah, crazy stuff, but I've heard that over the years, Or I saw an opportunity and it might not come again. I was at a convention. This woman was there. I figured no one would ever know, so no one's damaged by it. But in my experience, it always comes out in a marriage. Somehow or another, it always comes out. And when it does, the pain that it causes is sometimes irreconcilable.
Yeah, I think you gotta also differentiate between hollow versus emotional, right? Hollow, I mean the sense of when you could, any person, and I guess this goes towards that fulfillment and also spirituality side of how I view it, in the sense of connection with others. But you have hollow, where it's just you have hollow sex with somebody that's so quick, easy, but it's superfluous, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have those that you truly love and you connect with. That's where you go, and going back to what you're talking about, that's that true fulfilled connection with others.
So if your wife had hollow sex, you'd forgive her more easily?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying about how that fulfillment, where it does by having that connection and emotions with love and affection and passion with your connection, that is what's strong, and that's what keeps you connected as a couple. Mm-hmm. As opposed to just hollow, where it's just like, we just need to do it, and then it makes you feel as if you're a tool or prop, as opposed to your wife or husband.
Okay.
With the others, so I find that so curious in the sense of how I think where the conversations need to go in terms of having that candor with somebody who you rely on for the religious side, with that advice and that guidance that can allow you to dive deeper into your thought, into your heart, to fully unfold the issues that are.
And you touch, Mike, importantly on this idea of communication. On Retrouvailles weekend, we found so often the heart of the problem is really not people do have money problems, people have sex problems, but the real problem is they stop effectively communicating. That you probably do more effective communicating when you're dating someone than you do in the marriage because of all the distractions of job and children and mortgage and society. if we can get married people to get back to being better at communicating, all they do on Retrofy is teach you how to dialogue again. So I'll give you an example. On Valentine's Day in my church, I have people renew their vows, and to say, looking eyeball to your significant other, your wife, your husband, I love you, you mean the world to me. It's troubling to me when a couple will say to me, that was really nice today at church, because the truth is, while we feel it, we haven't said it in a long time. They don't communicate. And that, I think, is a form of cancer in a relationship.
I think it's so right now. But how come, has the church done any efforts to facilitate maybe like Sunday Mass, where it's not just Valentine's Day, but where there are times that couples can come, or this is just for couples, or where they can have that, not a lecture per se, but more of a true discussion, a dialogue. And I use that word loosely in a dialogue because it's more, you don't want to have people feel uncomfortable where they actually have to converse in front of an audience, but rather than it's more of a monologue that can use certain anecdotes, use perhaps parables from the Bible that can highlight ways.
You talk about marriage enrichment, and every church, synagogue, and mosque should offer it, because the people who mostly come to church, in fact, are married people who are trying to figure out a way to live a marriage effectively. You don't know that, Mike, because I haven't seen you there lately, but every homily I
Why
give...
are you going to do an underhanded comment like that?
Every homily I give, every Sunday, has some constituent element about family life, married life, because otherwise all I'm doing is retelling you what you heard in the Bible, and what does that do? The application is what's important. Example, you would think with Jesus that he must talk about all sorts of sin, stealing, and exorcisms, and devils, and infidelity, all that. No, the sin that Jesus condemns the most, 17 times as I counted, is hypocrisy. The husband who is cheating on his wife, the greater sin to me is not the sex act, it's the hypocrisy of saying, that's my wife, the mother of my children, I stood up in public and I declared my love for her forever on our wedding day, but on the side I have somebody else. Right. The sin is hypocrisy. And in all of our lives, if we could address the elements of hypocrisy, the church, you brought up the scandals before, our church has always made a practice of telling people all about sexual ethics, while at the same time, some priests were living anything but sexual ethics. So that's hypocrisy. The government, when we say, I care about the poor and the downtrodden, but I won't do anything for them. Sometimes people criticize people like me, who is active in the pro-life movement, by saying, you want to get the baby born, but what will you do for the woman and her child once the child is born? And they're right. Many of my Republican friends are great about saying, I'm against abortion, but unless you have social programs in place to help them, it's all empty. It's hypocrisy. It doesn't matter.
What are you doing after the baby's born?
Exactly, and that really matters.
That's the most important, right?
Yeah, for the rest of your life, child, what are we going to do for you, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's so important in the sense of having those discussions and that allow people to see the rationality. And that's what I love about you coming on, because this has been truly, I hope, enlightening for many people listening, where they can feel that connection with you and with the church, and knowing that they can have that person to go to have those conversations. But something else that was really put on my head I wanted to ask you about was about reforms for the church, that can it adapt to 2023? What are your thoughts about changes to maybe
I
for
hope
priests?
So. You know, I've said it in public. It's not news that I believe that for hundreds of years after Jesus, you had both a celibate and a married clergy. I'd like to see us, I think it'd be good for the church to have married men who were priests as well. I think it's coming in time. The other thing, in terms of evolution, or as you say, reformation, back in the 1980s, you had someone, one of the popes, in fact, later on, who would say in one of his documents, the homosexual person is intrinsically disordered. Well, that's not a way to make people who are homosexual feel very welcome in the church.
Right.
As opposed to a Pope Francis who was in Chile, and he says to these three homosexual guys, the Holy Father doesn't care if you're gay, God doesn't care if you're gay, both God and the Holy Father care that you live a good moral life. Right. Well, that's a big step for us, you know, to go from a point where you say you're intrinsically disordered to saying God loves you and the Pope loves you. So we're making steps, Mike. We're making steps.
I think it's great. I'm curious to see what was or curious to understand, I guess would be the word. What was the reason why you have celibate priests?
Well, I'll give you the spiritual reason. The spiritual reason is, the truth is, most of my Protestant minister friends and even my rabbi friends who are married say it's a very, very hard thing to juggle unless you have a wife, a spouse, who is really as into ministry as you are to make both a marriage and family life work, while at the same time, I have 3,000 families in my parish. They expect me to be there for them. This week, there were 5 funerals. When they call and they say, I want you at my wake, I want you at my funeral, I want me to help you get through this grief and pain, I don't know what I would say to my teenage kid who says, Dad, you're going to come to the game? Well, I can't come to the game. I have to do the wake or funeral, be there for this other family. Like, how do you raise a family effectively and at the same time be available to, and by the way, 3,000 families is relatively small in Long Island. A place like St. Rose of Lima in Massapequa has 7,000 families. How can those priests have a wife and children and at the same time be available for all those other families that need them? So I think a lot of it came from, you don't have one particular family because you're available to every family. So I think that's the spiritual reason behind it. Availability to serve people, to bring God to people in a wide community. I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. And I still believe, like the Greek Orthodox, what they do is they say, look, you want to be a bishop, somebody high up in the church, you have to be celibate. But if you want to be a parish priest, you can be married with children. And somehow it works for them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I look at that as a true service.
Yeah.
Spiritual service. So it's interesting how I went into public service and yours was a spiritual service.
Well, that's what we're there for. And you really can't say no to your people. I may put them off because I got too many appointments, but I think my husband's being unfaithful. We lost our job. Our kid is into drugs. I have a child who's sadly into depression beyond belief.
Suffered a miscarriage, maybe even.
I got to do something about it, Mike. I got to be available. And I have to believe that if I had a wife and children, that they would have to be, as they should be, my priority. So I'd have to be bad at the job in order to be a good parent and spouse, I think.
I think that's amazing. What made you make that commitment? Commitment to the church, commitment to service? You know,
it's 42 years that I'm doing this, and I have never once regretted it. Where else? Well, there are probably a few other places, but every day in my life, I know by the end of the day that some people whose lives I touched are better off because I was able to minister to them. It's not a question of, well, I got some good done in life, but I didn't have much good. Every day, I can end my day saying somebody's a little more peaceful, a little more comforted, a little more consoled, maybe a little closer to God because of what I do. So it's a wonderful life. It's a great opportunity. I just said it's a wonderful life. Frank Capra, the film director, was a very close friend of mine, and he used to say to me all the time, what a privilege you have that people invite you deeply into their life and you get to help them when perhaps no one else can. People will tell a priest things that they might not tell their own therapist. You have a great privileged role, and I get to use that great role every day to make people's lives, I hope, a little better. So I went through college. I dated one woman for 4 years, but after college, I decided that I was called to ministerial service, and I love the life. And I'm always sad when people say they didn't find the priesthood rewarding or interesting. I find it interesting, rewarding, exciting every single day. But as you know, Mike, I don't necessarily live a typical priest life. You know, I've been very active in media, which is why I'm happy to come on a program like yours. I'm on Sirius XM on the Catholic channel. I do stuff for Fox News. I do stuff for Newsmax, ABC Eyewitness News, PBS, to talk about values that last. And I think if St. Paul lived today, he wouldn't be traveling around the Mediterranean in a boat. He'd be using popular media, because popular media is a way to reach a lot of people effectively. And I've tried to do that. So I do not only my work in my parish, but outside of that as well.
So, Monsignor, you're absolutely wonderful. Where can people listen more of you and see more of you?
Thank you, Mike, for asking that. You know, I'm on Sirius XM, as I mentioned, but probably
what channel?
Even easier, the Catholic channel 129, Sunday morning, 7:30, 9, and 2:30 in the afternoon. But even easier, just go to your computer and punch in YouTube, Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante, and every week, which I love, I get to interview people who are interesting to talk about their faith and values. Mike Piazza recently on, Derek Cheetah, Drew Brees, people like that, as well as people like Attorney General Bill Barr. They all come at faith and religion from a different perspective, but I love to hear how people meet God and experience the spiritual life.
I think it's wonderful. Monsignor, you are a blessing to all of us. Thank you so much for coming
Mike,
on.
Thanks for having me on. You're wonderful too.
Pleasure.
Yeah.